Okay, in Sefer Ha-Aggadah, we review the Aggadot that are related to destruction now, to the ones that have to do with Esther and Mordechai, because chronologically this is after the destruction. The timing of the Megillah is not clear, so we'll go with the assumption of the Midrash is that it happened in between the destruction of the first temple and the construction of the second one. Even though some commentators suggest that's probably when it happened. It happened after they returned to Zion, after they built the Bet HaMikdash in 516 BCE. That's when the related events happened. In any case, the Midrash says the following: Amar rabbi-ovadia bar Simon, אתה מוצא בית שיש בו נחש, מעשנים בו מן הקרן של האיילות ומן השיער של אישה ומיד הנחש בורח. That's interesting. Rabbi-ovadia bar Simon tells us of a practice that people had at the time of the Mishnah, which obviously is a pagan practice. It's kind of some kind of an incantation that if there was a snake in the house, and they needed to drive the snake away, they would bring antlers of gazelles. I don't know if gazelles have antlers, but they mean the deer. But they bring antlers, and they do? Okay. So they burn those antlers and a woman's hair, and that drives the snake away. Now it's not clear. Right, exactly. That's what I would have thought. That it would drive everybody away, not necessarily the snake. I know that this is done to drive away bees or other insects. So, but we don't know if it was necessarily this. But for some reason, maybe the first person who did that, that's what he had. And that remains as, it has to be a woman's hair, has to be the antler of a gazelle. So, I know, I agree, it's the smoke, but the Midrash locks here on the point that it comes from a woman, and the gazelle is a female animal, right? And when we take this in context with the Mizmor, which is associated with Purim, which is Tehillim 22, Lamnatzeach al Ayelet HaShachar. So Ayelet HaShachar is a star, the star of dawn, the first light that you see, but is also understood as the gazelle of the morning, and this is Esther. So all these connotations are being put together. What is the conclusion of the Midrash? It says, Kach Devorah ve'Esther shemeshulot ka'ayalot. This is actually a Midrash that praises women. It says, you need the power of the woman to drive away that snake, that serpent. Devorah lo zaza ragla ad she'ibda lesisra ulchol chelotav, ve'Esther lo zaza ragla ad shetzalva lehaman v'aseret banav. So Devorah did not calm down until she annihilated Sisra and all of his legions, and Esther did not calm down until she brought about the demise of Haman and his 10 children. And that's interesting because in another place in the Gemara, they not about Esther but about Devorah, they disapprove of Devorah. They don't like her, maybe because she was a judge and a prophet, so she threatens the status of the men who are judges and prophets and rabbis. So they bring Devorah, they mention Devorah alongside another prophetess that is mentioned in the Tanakh. She's not that famous, but if you know the archaeology of Yerushalayim, you would know her. Her name is Hulda. There's a gate that was excavated. It's to the right of the Kotel. It's called Sha'ar Hulda Nevi'ah. She is mentioned in the book of Melachim, in the book of Yirmiyahu, as the wife of Shalom ben Harhas Shomer HaBegadim, but she herself was a prophet. So the rabbis say there were two. Whoever said this in the Talmud did not like women too much. He says, Lo ya'asra ruta l'nashe. A woman should not have a position of power. We say there were two women who were Nevi'ot, and what are their names? Devorah, a bee, a bumblebee, and Hulda, which means a rat in the Mishnaic Hebrew, even though we don't know that it really means that in the Tanakh. So that was a disparaging view of one of the rabbis. But here we have a positive view. They say that Devorah and Esther were both the leaders who brought the victory to Am Yisrael. And it's interesting because it's a different type of action taken by both of them. Devorah was a prophet who led a military campaign. Esther manipulated the men around her between Haman and Ahasuerus she managed to orchestrate a situation where they will be they become opponents, and she puts them in the final battle when she does the last feast before Haman is executed, and she brings the king to think that Haman has an affair with her. She risks herself, but she manages to do all that. So she's very clever, and she really works, instead of working with tactics of power that are head on, she works behind the scene quietly. So this is what the general view of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Simon on the Megillah. Now, the next midrash here is on page 115 in Sefer Ha-Aggadah. שאלו תלמידיו את רבי שמעון בן יוחאי, מפני מה נתחייבו שונאיהם של ישראל שבאותו הדור כליה. The students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked him, why were the enemies of Israel sentenced to death at that generation? Why the enemies of Israel is a euphemism. So instead of saying Israel, they say Sonei Israel. But they mean, why did the Jews in the time of Hashverosh, why did they deserve such a decree that they were about to die, all of them? Amar lahem imu atem. The rabbi says, okay, you tell me. He asks the students, what do you think? Amru lo mipnei shenehenu misaudato shel oto rasha. They said because they enjoyed the seudah of Hashverosh. And that's very interesting, because when you hear today speeches and classes and or written articles on the Megillah in the Orthodox world, that's the phrase that remained. It is brought down in commentaries and always that this was the major sin of the Jews of the Persian kingdom, that they attended the meal or the feast of Hashverosh and enjoyed it. And then they are medakdek also, they analyze the word nehenu. They say it's not that they attended. If they had just attended, it would be okay, but they enjoyed it. But all these commentaries forget to mention that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai rejects it. He says, no, this is nonsense. This is not the reason. So they dwelt on that. Why? Because they didn't like the teshuvah, the answer that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gave. So it's important to look at this midrash. Now, what is it, the point of between nehenu, or enjoyed the meal, or attended? There were those who said, okay, if the king summons you to a feast, if you don't show up, you could be a traitor. So you have to go and you have to eat, but you don't have to celebrate. You don't have to enjoy. You eat it because you have to. It's a way to save your life, from death. And there's a story about that, about a Jew who used to work for a prince in Europe, and he was very good relationships with him, and very good terms. But one day when he comes in and his master is working, is eating, he says, Moshe, why don't you have a piece of steak? He says, no, we can't. We're not allowed to have that meat. He says, oh, okay, sorry about that. So sit and let's talk. So they talk, and then he takes finishes the steak. He takes his dessert wine and pours a cup, and he tells Moshe, would you like to have a drink? He says, no, I'm sorry, I can't have that wine. So he said, wait a second, I heard from one of your rabbis that if your life is in danger, you will be allowed to drink. Is this true? The Jew says, yeah, that's true. So he opens the drawer, he takes out a gun, he says, if you don't drink the wine, I'm going to kill you. So he drinks the wine. He said, no, Moshe, how was it? He said, it was delicious, but you should have pulled the gun up before with the steak. So that's the idea of nehenu misoto shel oto rasha. This is the argument. There's a way, like if you're obligated to do it, they do it, but you feel that that's not what you want to do. So there's a whole theology there, which is interesting. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai doesn't accept that. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Amar lahem im ken shebeshushan yihargu shebechol haolam kulo al yihargu. Says if this is the case, the only people who attended the feast of Hashverosh were the Jews of Shushan, the capital. Because if you look closely at the Megillah, it says that Hashverosh threw two feasts. He had two parties. The first one, which took 180 days, was apartemim v'sarei hamidonot lefanav. Was for the ministers, the diplomats. There was only the officials of the Persian Empire, which did not include Jews, maybe one or two among them. And then he did Mishte Shivat Yamim Lechol Ha'am Hanimtzeim B'Shushan HaBira. Then he made another feast of 7 days long for the people of Shushan. So only the Jews who lived in Shushan attended this feast, and they would not, for that, deserve the death penalty. So Amulo Emorata, they said, okay, so we don't know. What is the answer? So you realize this interpretation has been rejected. Amar lehem mipnei sheishtahavu latzelem. It says because they bowed down to idolatry, and that is following a story that is already mentioned in the book of Daniel. I mean, already some say Daniel was written later, but in this chronology, the assumption is that Hashverosh, like the other kings, forced the Jews to bow down to a statue. Amrulo, and we have to talk about like the correctness or the veracity of this statement. Amrulo v'chim asofanim yesh badavar. They said, okay, so if the sin was idolatry, they should not have been forgiven. They said, v'chim asofanim, like God is giving them a special treatment. If they really worshipped idols, they should die. Amar lahem hem lo asu ela lefanim. He says they didn't really worship idols. They just did it because their life was in danger. So even if some people believe that they should have sacrificed their lives for it, God knows the truth. God knows that they do not believe in these idols. So they just did it superficially, right? They pretended to worship idols, but they didn't. So God also pretended to put their life at risk, but didn't cause them damage eventually. Now, when we look at the story of the statue and how it connects with the story of Hashverosh, it's a little problematic because the commandment or the decree to bow down to an idol is mentioned in the book of Daniel, and it's mentioned about Nebuchadnezzar and about Belshazzar, that they built a huge statue in the valley of Dura in Bavel, and that the king made a decree that whenever the sound of music will sound, there was a special orchestra playing. Everybody had to bow down to the statue, like at a set time, all over his empire. This is actually, it's an interesting pasuk in Daniel because it has a Greek word. This shows that Daniel may maybe from a later source. It says when you hear the sounds of psanterin and symphony. The symphony is the 7 reeds flute, because many phones are symphony. So it's the word symphony. If anyone asks you where is the first time you find the word symphony in our sources, is in the book of Daniel, Symponia. So that was the story in Daniel. It doesn't fit the story of Hashverosh. We really cannot chronologically associate idolatry with Hashverosh, because Hashverosh came from the Persian dynasty, the dynasty of Koresh. What was the famous act of Koresh? The proclamation of Koresh, Cyrus the Great, in 538, 539 he conquered Babel, and he made this conquest. He said, all the Jews who want to return to their land and build the temple are allowed to do so. And in the exhibition in the last century, a cylinder was found. It's called the cylinder of Cyrus, where you can see this inscription, and it's not unique only to Jews. Cyrus actually said, any nation, anyone who wants to go back to his country and build his temple is allowed. Because Cyrus was a wise ruler. He understood that what Nebuchadnezzar did, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple in Yerushalayim and moved people from one country to another to detach them from their loyalty to the land. But because of that, his kingdom fell, because no one felt connected to where he lived, and no one was willing to defend it from enemies from the outside. So when the Persians and the Medians, Bnei Paras Umadai, came over, there was no resistance. The Persian Empire came with a completely different approach. They said, we want everyone to live in their native country, speak their native tongue, worship their local gods, and pay tribute to the central command in Persia. But they divided the kingdom into smaller regions that were controlled by princes that were connected to the Persian royal family. In this manner, everyone felt so. The people felt so joyous. Right, we're allowed to have this kind of religious independence. So they helped protect the empire. And indeed, the Persian Empire survived for about 1,000 years. It was a long-lasting empire. So it doesn't fit the story of Ahasuerus forcing them to bow down to the idols. But more accurately, probably it portrays what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai has to deal with in his generation. Because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era, was close with Rabbi Akiva, a student of Rabbi Akiva, and under the Greeks and the Romans, there were a lot of people who became Hellenizers or worshipped idols, and there were those people who said we should reject them completely. We should sever our ties with them completely. Don't talk to them. Don't reject them. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, let's judge them favorably. Hem lo asu ela lefanim, af HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo asayim hem lefanim. What Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says is, let's treat them as people who are doing whatever they're doing just superficially because of fear of the government. And instead of turning against our brethren and fighting with them as idolaters, as pagans, let us fight against the Roman government. That was the ideology of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So he uses the story of Megillat Esther, but really he's talking about his generation. And I think even though, thank God, I don't think we are plagued by idolatry today, but it's a good message for us also that we find very often in the religious communities where people pass judgment on other people, and is that person religious? Is this person not? Says, you know what? All we see is superficial. We never know what's in a person's heart. So we should not pass judgment on other people unless we really know what their ideology or theology or behavior is. And we'll learn from what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said here. Baruch Adonai, Ba'olam, Amen, Amen.